Welcome to Page and Screen with John Paul SARNI. That is me. On this podcast, we're going to be focusing on a new book each week that has caught the eye of the entertainment industry. So we'll be looking at books that are being adapted into film and television and theater, and also looking at the actors and screenwriters and directors who are working on them and taking them on, and the historians who are capturing the artists and art that we love every day. So my first guest here has had a long and storied career on such long-running television series as The O.C., Southland, and Gotham. He's also worked on feature films on Broadway and is a screenwriter, director, and producer. His latest outing, however, which is right behind me over here, I'll figure it out because I'm trying to be a weatherman. His latest outing is a book called Easy Money: Cryptocurrency, Casino Capitalism, and the Golden Age of Fraud. It's written with Jacob Silverman. The book is a proper feat of journalism, and it's out today in softcover after landing immediately on the New York Times bestseller list when it first came out, and a new afterword to keep all of the horrors very current and updatable. So please welcome Ben McKenzie.
Thanks for having me, JP. This is so fun.
Of course, I'm glad to see you. It's nice to see you with all of your books. Do you have multiple copies of the book in your house so that when people come over, you can sign one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I may have a few boxes. I just lied to the publisher, and I was like, if you give me free copies, I'll give it to all of my famous friends.
Right.
And so they sent me way more books than I have friends.
But you got some nice blurbs. Ron Chernow and some nice people talking about your book.
Yeah, Ron. So I live in Brooklyn, and Ron lives in the neighborhood. And we, Ron Chernow, who wrote Hamilton and The House of Morgan, and an incredibly accomplished historian and author. He lives in the neighborhood, and we had met once or twice. And I was just starting this journey, 2 years ago, and he literally walked by my house as I was leaving, and he says, "Hi, you don't really know each other." And I'm writing a book, and he kind of was like, "Okay." And anyway, we fell into a conversation. He's just the kindest, gentlest man, and so we became friends as I was sort of like picking his brain about how do you write a book. And we would have lunch. We still have a lunch every few months and talk about what he's doing, which is a biography of Mark Twain that I think will be out next year, which sounds amazing. And what I'm doing. And he gave me a blurb, which is really, really nice. I was a little nervous to ask Ron Chernow for a blurb because I didn't want it to affect our friendship. If he hated the book, I wanted to still be my friend.
Right, of course. Nice. Excellent. Well, look, before we start, I just need to set the table because I think that everyone should be of the same of the same mind and the same understanding. So just to make it easy, because the book there's so much going on with cryptocurrency and how it works and all the different kinds, and there's a lot to it. So I want you just for a second just to humor me and imagine that you're coming to see me and my parents at their home on the North Shore of Massachusetts, and they're in their 70s, and we're having lunch on the water, and you have a lobster roll, and my mother, who's in her 70s, asks you, "What on earth is cryptocurrency?" Do you have is there a distilled way to talk about it yet, or because there's so many pieces to it?
Sure. So what would I say to your mother after she's just given me a lobster roll in the store? I would say, first of all, this lobster roll is the best thing I've ever eaten. Because you got to butter them up so they'll listen to you talk about crypto for the next hour.
Right.
And I would tell her that what is crypto? It's just a story. It's a story. It's what's called an economic narrative. The economist Robert Shiller, who's won a Nobel Prize, has talked about how economic narratives form, and they're stories that sort of gain enough social traction to become widespread, and they're incredibly powerful. And economics actually has a lot to do with storytelling. I have an undergraduate degree in economics, and it's interesting to try to talk to people about money and economics in a way that challenges their assumptions. I think most people think it's about mathematics and models and all the sophisticated modeling, which there is a part of that. That's a whole field.
Sure.
But there's a whole other field that's behavioral economics, and it's about how people work. Because at the end of the day, economics is actually how this thing that we made up, money, affects our lives and how we interact with each other in this thing that we also made up called the economy. And so cryptocurrency is just a new story of money, at least theoretically. And I explore in it whether that story is true. And I find that it isn't.
Well, I like the way that you describe it, because at the very beginning you say that crypto is Vegas without the drinks, the dinner, or the show. And,
Yeah.
just there's no there. Because when people are investing and they think of stocks and other things, like there's something there. There's a company that makes a product and what have you. But cryptocurrency just isn't that. It's a different kind of thing. And it's basically a form of gambling, because you also talk about how it's like that Vegas thing where in order for someone to win, someone else has to lose. It's not
That's right.
It's not like a stock where a rising tide lifts all boats kind of idea. And
Correct.
and so how did you get into this? Because your degree is in economics. I think you probably I would imagine you would have been studying like Chekhov or something before you started acting, but you were doing economics, and now you've come back to it some years later. And what sort of pushed you? I think it was you started working on this during COVID when we all had a little bit of extra time, but it was a moment when I think a lot of people had a lot of extra time and a little bit of extra money.
Yeah, that's right. And then that dovetails perfectly with cryptocurrency and why it took off. It really took off at the end of 2020 and into 2021 when, it was the height of COVID and people were sitting at home and they had a little extra money from stimulus checks or PPP loans or whatever. And historically speaking, when people do have that extra money, they gamble with it. At least a percentage of that money goes into gambling. And crypto really is very similar to gambling for all the reasons that you articulated and more that we can go into if we want to. But the way I fell into it was COVID boredom, was being I just turned 40. I had been on TV for 15 years or so. Made a good living, was very happy in my personal life. I met my now wife on the last show that I did. Miranda and I have 3 kids and have this wonderful life in Brooklyn. But even before COVID hit, I was just feeling like I was kind of doing the same thing over and over again. Brooding teenager becomes brooding cop, becomes second brooding cop, was sort of, if you want to do the synopsis of my career in 5 seconds. And I was looking for something new, and then COVID hit and there was no work, as you know well. There was nothing. I mean, there was plenty to do, and if you're on the development side, I guess. But, as an actor, you're often the last person involved in the project in the sense that it's going. They're going to shoot it. Do you want to be a part of it or not? And obviously that work was not around. So I started paying attention to what was happening in the financial markets, which was sort of unusual. That obviously they crashed initially or went way, way down when COVID hit. And then they started going way back up. They went back not only to where they were before, but the stock market boomed even higher. And that's kind of where this title "Easy Money" comes from. It's about setting crypto in a larger context, which is the macroeconomic context and social context of both the easy money times when the government printed all of this money in order to keep the economy from crashing, and situating it in opposition to the subprime crisis. The subprime crisis or great financial crisis of 07, 08 is actually where cryptocurrency was born. It was born in 08 when the Bitcoin white paper, this paper that outlined what Bitcoin would be, was put on the internet. And so all these things kind of combined, I would say, the subprime crisis and the distrust of our financial system, which would allow people to sell you on a system that is not that, right? The opposite, which is what crypto is supposed to be.
Sure.
So it was born out of that, and it was born out of the internet and the way the internet has changed our lives, which was made even more, which affected our lives even more during COVID because we couldn't be next to each other, right? And so all of these people were online all of the time, myself included, and saw this thing and had a little money in their pocket and saw this thing that was supposedly going to make them rich because they saw their friends getting rich or supposedly getting rich. And they saw the, TikTok influencers that they follow telling them about crypto and the celebrities and this and that and the other. And I found myself paying attention to that because a friend of mine, just a regular guy I had gone to college with, Dave told me I should buy some because he bought some and he supposedly made money. But Dave had given me terrible financial advice when I was in my 20s. He had told me to invest in a stock that I never heard of. And anyway, we put some money into it and promptly lost it. And so Dave had this track record with me of like kind of being a counter indicator as to like what you should be doing. And yet crypto was everywhere. So I don't know. I just kind of like became fascinated by it. I was just,
and do you
I couldn't
think that
understand the story. The stories didn't make sense, I guess.
Do you think that it came out of the 2007, 2008 when the government was coming in to bail out the banks and things like that? Because a lot of the things that you talk about in the book is that this idea that people like the idea of something like crypto because there isn't that sort of, big brother third party kind of watching over things. And then it's almost like this, allegedly this sort of, peer-to-peer transaction where you don't have a regulating body. And so do you think that people were just really interested in doing something because they were, they wanted more control of their own money and they thought that if they can do it directly, then it's their choice and it's theirs to lose, which a lot of people did.
Exactly. No, it's a wonderful way of getting people in the door. Yeah. It's a tactic con men use all the time, and people in our business, by the way. If you want to convince people of a news story, you need to start with a story that everyone agrees upon, and that story is our current financial system sucks.
Right.
And try to find a person who won't agree with that statement in some form or fashion. Now they'll agree. They'll say anything else after that, right? Like the people on the right will say something, people on the left, like I'm not here to talk about that per se, but like. At a minimum, everyone understands that our current financial system is deeply flawed, right? And most people harbor some, if not anger, then frustration and disappointment at the way the government handled the subprime crisis, which was a frickin' debacle, right? I mean, and just a failure on so many different levels. And so that level of mistrust of the system gives the story of cryptocurrency an enormous amount of power because you then tell them, yeah, this is the opposite of that. This is going to be decentralized. There's no big brother, like you said. You're going to be able to send money. Money is going to come back to the people is a phrase that I do a lot, right? And that sounds so good. Doesn't that sound great? Wouldn't that be great, JP, if we didn't need these terrible banks and you and I could just like send this thing called money back and forth to each other instantaneously all the way. And by the way, we'd be private. It would be, synonymous. So like we wouldn't know, the government wouldn't know who. And, that all sounds good. It's not true. It's really, really not true. Crypto is actually effectively, if I was going to sort of sum up the book, it's basically the opposite of everything it says it's going to be. It says it's decentralized. It's actually very centralized. It actually, it's not anonymous. It's pseudonymous. So a blockchain, which is the technology that crypto is sort of based upon, is a ledger. It's a record of transactions. So once you understand who owns what, they're called wallets, these sort of accounts that people have with crypto in them. Once you understand who owns what wallet, you actually have their entire transaction history. So it's sort of like, now that you see all these crimes being prosecuted, you'll see the governments walking in with just like stacks of information about like, every transaction that you've ever undertaken. So the stories aren't true, but they're so powerful that people, almost it's easy to sell them when the number's going up, when everyone else seems to be making money. That's when the dynamics of Ponzi start taking over, where it's an economic narrative. It's kind of like a virus. It spreads from person to person, ironically enough, during the pandemic, but like it spreads from person to person. It used to be in person, it used to be, cryptos are kind of like money, multi-level marketing schemes as well. So it's like
Tupperware.
The Tupperware party, the 5-hour Tupperware party is replaced by the 60-second TikTok. It's like you're just quote unquote connecting with people who happen to be advising you financially effectively, right? Who happen to be telling you.
But also Hollywood played a big part in that because the people that couldn't understand it, that were just like starting to wrap their heads around it, there was a very famous person who I think in your book you talk about. There was a $250,000 Instagram ad that someone put up. Tell us what that was.
That was Kim Kardashian. She shilled for a cryptocurrency on her Instagram. which had at the time, probably has even more now, 250 million followers. So she sent to her 250 million followers an Instagram ad, which said, "Hey guys, I've heard about this thing, Ethereum Max. You should check it out. It's a really funny post. It's like, there's only 4 quadrillion Ethereum Maxes coins that have ever been made, and they're going to burn a quarter of the quadrillion supply. And it's like all the stuff that, like, I'm pretty sure Kim Kardashian doesn't know what that means. It doesn't mean anything. And
it was a copy and paste job.
It's really funny. Anyway, and then also at the very bottom of it, of course, says, "This is not financial advice," which is hilarious because that's, of course, what you are trying to say because you know what you're doing is wrong. And she didn't disclose what she was being paid. And so when my journey really started in terms of the public side of it, I'd had all these suspicions about crypto very quickly from my friend Dave on. The public side started when I approached this journalist, Jacob Silverman, and I said, "Hey, I want to write a book about this because I think it's a big lie and it's a big fraud." And he covered tech for New Republic. And so he was familiar with the field. And the first article we wrote, we decided to write articles to sort of prove our bona fides to try to sell the book. The first article was about Kim Kardashian and about the celebrities and about, just on a basic sort of gut level, how gross it was. Because celebrities have always hawked products ever since there have been celebrities. It's understandable. They have a relationship with the viewer, and sure. Why wouldn't a company want to take advantage of that? And a celebrity shilling a regular retail product, a regular consumer product, a car, clothes, whatever.
Watches,
There's nothing wrong with that. But this is a financial product, and they're selling you a financial product that, they're not disclosing how much money they were paid. They are not a licensed financial advisor. They shouldn't be giving financial advice, period. And a lot of these cryptocurrencies, pretty much all of them in my book, but certainly everything besides Bitcoin, is not really money in terms of how, if words had meaning, money in economics, it does things. These things are not money. They're investments, like we talked about. They're securities. And securities have laws in the United States. They've had them since the 1930s. Because prior to that, we didn't have them. And then we got the Great Depression and they were like, "Hey, we should probably have some rules for this stuff."
Right. So
these cryptocurrencies, these celebrities were selling unregistered, unlicensed securities on public television, on national television. It was, as someone who was looking at it from that framework, admittedly a bit of a geeky framework, but pretty hard, I would say, to argue that I'm wrong about much of what I've said at this point. It was pretty daunting, right? I remember Elon Musk going on Saturday Night Live and shilling Dogecoin. And it's this, do you remember this bit? It's like, he's on Weekend Update and, the guys, he comes on as the Dogecoin advisor, and he's got a jacket and a little bow tie. He's supposed to be the dorky, smart blockchain guy. And he's talking about Dogecoin, sort of droning on, and the guys interrupt him and they're like, "So it's a hustle." And he goes, no, blockchain. So it's a hustle. No, blockchain. So it's a hustle. Yeah, it's a hustle. And he's in the camera. And you're like, dude, that's securities fraud. You just committed securities fraud live on national television and you're laughing about it. And by the way, you should be, because you're Elon Musk and you're going to get away with it. It drove me crazy. And so the celebrities, the Matt Damon ad was my tipping point.
But this was the beginning of your process. You really went in and you went all around. You went to Miami and Texas. You went to El Salvador. You really tucked in and you talked to a lot of people. And, now coming out the other side, I would perhaps I would imagine that you thought that this book would be like the button at the end of the chapter of Bitcoin. But now we're seeing, all these years later, from Kim Kardashian down to the rest, that a lot of people are really being truly penalized. I mean, you've, I think, sat in front of a Senate Finance Committee to talk about your research and what's happened. So what has, it seems like everyone is paying for the sins that happened years ago, and, they act like it was just talk, but there were very real consequences, not just a lot of people who lost their money, but in the new afterword to the book, you talk about, where money has changed hands to some of the most tragic events that have happened around the world, and that they're being used to sell guns and to fund wars and all the rest of it. So the implications of what happens with Bitcoin, when people say, "Oh no, don't worry, it's nothing. It's just a thing." It's not really just a thing. It's there are some very real implications to something that is essentially spending money on air.
Right, exactly right. And I think people did discount it and still discount it, in the sense that, in the same way, or in a similar way, I would say, that they discounted what the subprime crisis was going to do up until it happened, and they really saw the repercussions. But sticking to cryptocurrency, so what you're doing is you're creating a financial system that is effectively running parallel to our regulated financial system. It's sort of like you hear the Wild West. It's the Wild West. And you're like, yeah, okay. Well, the Wild West, the actual Wild West, was not like the movies. First of all, you're probably dead by the time you're 25, right? Like, you probably died on childbirth or you died.
Yeah, it's like Oregon Trail. It's that sort of thing.
Right. And then if you didn't, like, you were either, good chance you're going to get shot and, or you're digging dishes for your life. But like, the Wild West is bad. Like, the reason, like, we have progressed since the Wild West, in fact, several hundred years. So what crypto was doing when creating this Wild West scenario was allowing criminals to transact instantaneously all over the world and avoid the banks. So what crypto is actually useful for, besides gambling. So what regular people, like the non-criminals, are using it, which is a lot of regular people.
Right. They're
putting money into it, hoping to get rich, right? They're hoping, like, they'll buy a crypto low and they'll sell it high and they'll keep the difference. That's an investment. And, great. But for the other people who are using it, it's a way to get something of value from one place in the world to another by avoiding banks. What is that known as? Money laundering. That is what's called money laundering. And so you see in the charges that have come out with a lot of people, that's what the biggest exchange in the world actually isn't Sam Bankman-Fried's exchange, because it still exists. It is Binance, and the head of Binance pled guilty to money laundering. Was it late last year, early this year, and has just been sentenced, and they paid like a $4 billion fine. There are real world consequences. The ability for criminals to move money all over the world instantaneously allows crypto is tied to everything from funding half of the North Korean nuclear weapons program to Chinese oligarchs buying sanctions evasion, tax evasion, Russian arms dealers buying Chinese drones to send to bomb Ukraine, ISIS, child sex trafficking, human trafficking, obviously scams, pig butchering, all this stuff. So it's a lot of bad stuff. Yeah. It allows anyone to do kind of anything that they want, right? As long as they don't get caught. And I think when it was just a gambling device and when the number was going up, it was kind of it was both so effective, but also so silly that I think people kind of was like, it's fun, it's a gambling, it's Vegas, right? Yeah. But this is not the current Vegas, which is like cleaned up for the families. This is Vegas when the mafia ran it. This is Vegas where people end up, in a lake or whatever is there in Vegas, in the desert, with two bullets in their head. Like, sure. It's not a good system. So,
but even but even after all of that, even after all the horrible things that have happened, I think we've seen at this moment, as we talk about it now, Bitcoin is doing very well. There's been like this, people are still looking at it as an investment in resurgence, and you could probably call your broker at Fidelity or somewhere and put money into a diversified account that taps into things like this. So how do you see the financial market now? Why are people still investing in it? Just because it just gives off money and people choose to turn a blind eye to all the other things that it's tied to?
Yes, although so crypto is still not cleaned up, right? Like Sam went down, CZ went down. A lot of people are either have either been convicted or have been charged or are facing thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, well, tens of thousands of civil lawsuits all over the world of all these investors that have lost money. So that's the broader context of like how much crime we're talking about. It's a lot.
Right.
And I'm just sticking to America for the moment. Like you could go all over the world and it would be pretty similar. So how is the number up? How is the number of Bitcoin at its, like, I think it's at its all-time high right now.
Sure. Yeah.
Is it because all of these new people are coming in and investing all of these this new money? Well, what's fascinating about it is if you look at the polling, and I'm talking about like legitimate pollsters, there's a Fed survey, and it looked at how many people bought Bitcoin and per year, and it peaked in 2021. I think it was like maybe 12%. And then it was like 7 maybe in 2022, because that was when the crash happened or began to happen. And then I think it was like 6 now or 5 or lower, right? So the trend has actually been going down as a percentage of the American public. Fewer people are investing in crypto, and yet the number is up again. There's only a few possible explanations. The first is that it's gotten a little more mainstream in the sense that these things called ETFs, exchange traded funds, which are basically like sort of stocks that you can buy, mutual fund type stocks that you can buy. And so people can invest in crypto without having to go through an exchange, which is a pretty good idea because exchanges are, bucket shops where people steal your money. Right. So you should probably maybe not trade through the exchanges. Also centralized exchanges, right? Not decentralized, pretty right. Centralized. It was Sam Bankman-Fried and like 6 of his friends in a penthouse in the Bahamas getting coked out of their minds or Adderalled out of their minds and stealing your money. So there has been a little bit more mainstream in the sense of access, but is that explaining the price going up if fewer people are buying it? The other explanation is in the book, which is I look at actually how the criminal caper works at its essence. And the big baddie is still out there. The big baddie is the company called Tether, which is a stable coin that's basically the poker chips in the casino. It's the things that people are trading like dollars in the exchanges, but they're not dollars. They're not backed by the US government. So what are they backed by? Anyway, I don't want to talk about Tether too much unless you want to, because people's eyes glaze over, but they are the center of the whole con if I'm right. And I will just point out that so far I've been right.
Well, look, I think you do such a great job in the book of going into all the different areas and talking about it really in depth. And I think that there's, you have a lot of great material. I mean, you may or may not have had dinner with people from the CIA. And, during the course of the story, a lot of people have died under mysterious circumstances. So there's a lot of really juicy stuff. But also, as we go through the book, you took a camera crew with you for a lot of this. So tell me, do you have do you want to keep telling the story, or are you still digging into this to investigate what has gone on after the book has come out now?
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons why I was so excited to be on with you is obviously we have a personal relationship and a project together and things like that. But this is a page to screen story. What's interesting about it is that I came up with the idea for the book and reached out to Jacob and wrote the book together. And I started filming my interactions with a lot of different characters, including Sam Bankman-Fried. I have a whole interview with him before everything went kablooey.
I'm interested in seeing those tapes, Ben.
Well, you're going to get the opportunity because, I did it on a lark, but as it kept going and I kept getting stuff, like I started by I was going to South by Southwest with Jacob, and it's in my hometown, and I called my agent. I was like, hey, I just want to record some of these interviews. Like, can you find me a local DP? And so I hired a guy, and we started filming. And the first interview I had, substantive interview, was with a guy named Alex Mashinsky, who ran a crypto company called Celsius that was a Ponzi scheme, and that blew up 4 months later, and he's now been charged with fraud. And it was pretty clear the guy was a fraudster from sitting down with him for half an hour. And so when that's your first interview, you think, well, I should probably keep going. So I just kept recording, and I'm making a documentary. And it's really interesting to talk to you at this exact moment, because maybe we can go into this. The difference between writing for the page versus writing for screen, the difference in making a documentary versus making a narrative feature, how to tell stories, because the documentary, the book can go into way more detail than a documentary can go into, obviously.
Right.
They're just completely different mediums. So especially when you're writing a book that is sort of, econ light, right? I got like one chart in there, maybe three charts. But you can get dorky because like at the end of the day, let's be honest, there's only so many people that are going to buy this book anyway. It's like, even as a New York Times bestseller, like keep your expectations low. Book buying is, anyway, but you can do things in a book that you really can't do in a film. So I've had to simplify the story in the film, and the film becomes this exploration of money as a story, of this story, this thing that we made up that is kind of a collective hallucination, right? I mean, it's a social construct like government or religion, and for it to work, people need to believe in it.
Yeah.
And if enough people believe in it, then it works. And if it works, then they believe in it. And if that sounds like circular reasoning to you, you're right. It is.
Yeah.
And right, like, and we take it for granted in America because of the U.S. dollar, right, which is the global reserve currency, and is, it's this thing that people complain about inflation, but like go somewhere else. Like it's very mild compared to most of the rest of the world. But that's the exception rather than the rule in terms of monies over time, over history, and even monies now. Money, when you go into another country, and you've probably experienced this in your travels, and you go into a place where the currency is unstable, it has really severe ramifications. It becomes very difficult to trust. Essentially, money is trust, right? It's a form of trust that's been scaled up to like where we are in modern civilizations. But when that trust breaks down, usually it's a problem. The government is having issues. The political system is having issues. The social system is having issues. And then the currency can start getting really, really volatile. They tend to go hand in hand. It's not a coincidence. That's because, money is just as make-believe as the government, as the religion, as, it all relies on us.
Is this what happened in El Salvador, where there's actually like a Bitcoin ATM, and they were, like a government was like trying to, think that maybe this will save us. Maybe there's a way to adopt this new currency and have it, help our nation's economy.
Right, exactly. And I go to El Salvador in the book and in the movie, and it's really interesting to look at that, but just as a story.
Yeah.
Because when you actually go to El Salvador, like I did, and you so El Salvador is a very small country. It's about 7 million people. It's very poor. Average Salvadoran makes about $400 a month. And most of the economy is money that is sent home from America. There's like 2 to 3 million people of Salvadoran descent that live in the United States, and the money they send home is about a quarter of the economy. So the president, who was this like brash young guy, Nayib Bukele, a former marketing guy, gets elected, and the son of a wealthy landowner in El Salvador, so very similar to Trump in many ways. He gets elected, and he says, you know what, crypto is going to be treated like money in like 3 months. It's like June of 2021, like in September, we're going to use this as real money.
Yeah. Now,
use it in addition to the dollar. They were already on the dollar. And well, they do this, and it's chaos. Nobody's using it. They give every Salvadoran $30 worth of crypto to like try to get them to use the system, which is of course just an app. And like the price of Bitcoin crashes, and people get scammed out of the $30, or people just like, there was pictures of guys using like putting their dog up to the camera phone app to like get the $30. So when you actually go to El Salvador, I went there maybe like 6 to 8 months after the law was passed. Nobody's using it. Nobody's using crypto. Like you go to a market, they want dollars, man. They give me some greenbacks. Like, don't give me that. It's very funny. I have a little cut in the film of me just going from shop to shop, being like, except on Bitcoin, and then being like, no. The driest, like, and so when you go there, so then what's it about, right? If Bukele was saying that the way forward was people were going to be able to transact directly, they were going to be able to send money back home from overseas where they were making it and not pay the fees that Western Union and MoneyGram would charge, then like the story that he's selling is really interesting, right? It's a story of like banking the unbanked. democratizing our financial system, making sure that corporations don't have monopolies over, money transmission services and things like that. But the reality is that people aren't using it. Bukele has really deep ties to Tether, that company that I mentioned, which is the big baddie. They helped him write the new law that allows people to send money, cryptocurrency, sorry, not money, the fake money, into the country and not pay taxes. Now, why would you want to do that? Again, like, if you just replace the word cryptocurrency with money laundering, just try that the next time you read it.
Right.
just say money laundering, and it changes your perspective on sort of what's going on. So that's what I found in El Salvador. And it's interesting to try to talk about that in a film, but again, you just come back to the story. It's a story, and everyone is telling their own story, and fraudsters are really interesting. I started getting into the psychology, and that's kind of what the film is starting to pick up on as a theme, is fraudsters are very unusual as criminals because they're not they're not sort of horrible deviant members of society for the most, like, except for the fraud. They don't, tend to like commit violent crimes and things like that. In fact, their main difference between deviant members of society is they don't think they're criminals. They believe their own story so much. Sam Bankman-Fried still believes he's innocent. I guarantee you. On some level. He probably, he's a little schizo. So like, he might be DMing with a reporter saying it's all bullshit. But at the same time, he still believes, because he has to believe, that he's innocent.
Right. No one believes that they are the villain of their own story.
Exactly. And it is complicated and as simple as that in some ways. And it was really interesting to interview Sam and this guy, Alex Mashinsky, who's also been charged with fraud, and to just spend even just a little bit of time with them to really try to nail down what that is. It's obviously varies from person to person, but it's the most fun I had in the book was all the stuff I got to read to write the book. So all the stuff I got to read about how frauds work, and I like dorky stuff. So the history.
No, I love it. I think the history stuff is great, and there's a great book for anyone who has not read it, and they should certainly go get it, about the currency of tulips in the 1600s and what they were able to do, and the way that American states tried to set up their own sort of system in the 1800s of some privatized kind of banking system. But there's so much wonderful stuff in the book. I'm very excited to see the film when it's time, and I hope you'll keep us posted on all of it. But in the interim, the soft cover is out today of Easy Money, and I would suggest going to your local bookshop. Do you have a local bookshop that you recommend in New York City, Ben?
Books Are Magic.
Books Are Magic.
A couple of different locations. There's one near my house, which if you go, there'll be signed copies. So yeah,
excellent. Well, yes, absolutely. Please go pick it up. And by the way, I read a third of the book, and then I listened to you read it for the last bit because I was starting to hear you in my head as I was reading. So I just switched, and you do a great job narrating the book. So it's available in audiobook as well, and it's great fun and really smart, very well done. So thank you so much for coming by and talking to me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, JP. I love to talk to you all the time, but
yes.
To be on your podcast was a real treat, and I love the idea of the podcast. It's such a great idea for a podcast, because I think you're bridging these worlds between books and between the print and the screen, and that's such an interesting creative endeavor. Like maybe we can come back on when the doc's out and talk about it, but it's appreciated in Hollywood to some degree, or in the circles we travel in. But it's such a complicated and specific skill to develop, or set of skills to develop. I think it's a great idea for a podcast. So thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you for coming. And yes, we'll talk to you real soon.
All right.
All right. Thanks, Ben. Ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao.